My name is Lorraine Nolan, and I am
This
the Chief
meeting is being
Executive
recorded.
of the Health Products Regulatory Authority here in Ireland, or the HPRA as we are known. I'm delighted to be hosting this session today with Sea Change in conjunction with their annual Green Ribbon campaign. So just a couple of housekeeping issues before we start. As you may have heard there, this session is going to be recorded and it will be made available over the next day or so on Sea Change's YouTube channel. We will not be taking questions today during the session because the time would not permit it, but the chat function is available to all of you that are joining the session today. So if you do have any questions or you would like to make any comments, please put them into the chat and the Sea Change moderators will try to answer the questions at the end if the time permits, but if not, we'll revert to you with the responses in the coming days. It's also important for me to highlight that this is a Zoom webinar, and using Zoom functionality, you will only be able to see the panelists on the screen. And for the individual that is speaking at any given time, they will also be highlighted on the screen. So before we begin the session today, for those of you that may be joining that are not familiar with the HPRA, I think if you would allow me to just say a few moments about us and an organisation and to tell you what we do. We are a national health agency, and our primary focus is to protect and enhance both human and animal health. And we do this by ensuring that health products, and they are of course primarily medicines and medical devices, are safe, that they're effective, and that they are of a suitable quality. I think our core mission of protecting health is very much aligned with today's session as we discuss how feelings of shame and stigmatization can negatively impact on a person's mental health. I'm delighted today to be joined by a number of panelists that are very well positioned to speak on all of these issues. So first of all, I'm going to just briefly introduce the panel members, and I will come back to them again then to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves properly to you. My own colleague, Donal O'Connor, who is our clinical manager in our medical devices department. Paula Lawlor, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Suicide or Survive. And Suicide or Survive are one of our mental well-being partners for us as an organisation. And we have worked very closely with them over a number of years. And Linda Garvin, who is a Sea Change ambassador. I suppose as the chief executive of an organisation, I am very proud of many things that we do at the HPRA, but particularly so of the work we have done in our organisation in the area of mental well-being and changing people's opinions on mental ill health. This has been culture changing for us, very much so brought about through the opening up of conversations on how mental well-being affects every single one of us each day. We have implemented many supports for our staff and worked to break down the stigma associated with seeking support. One of the key ways we have done this is through having conversations regarding all spectrums of mental health difficulty. As an organisation, we have worked with Sea Change since 2018, and we officially became a Sea Change workplace partner in May 2019. Our ongoing journey with mental wellbeing in the HPRA is supported and guided by Sea Change. This partnership, as well as completing the Sea Change Workplace Pledge Programme, has really helped us to get to where we are today. It has also helped us structure our journey along the way. And we know this is a journey. I don't think any organisation can ever say they're there yet, but so that we can continue to strive and to evolve in supporting our culture of mental wellbeing within our organisation. So in today's discussion, we are going to focus on a number of key areas. First of all, very much so centering on feelings of shame associated with having mental illness, the impact shame can have on a person's mental health, stigma as a barrier to seeking help, but also the important role of language and how language can actually stigmatize mental ill health, and the supports and services that are available to anyone who is experiencing shame as a result of having a mental health difficulty. So before we get into the discussion, I would like to call on each of the panel members, and I'm going to start maybe with Paula just to give a brief introduction to themselves. So Paula, over to you.
Okay, so it's lovely to be here today and to join the conversation. It's always amazing to have these kind of conversations. So I'm the CEO of Suicide or Survive, not that long appointed, so just settling into the role. And in my kind of previous employment, I've worked as a psychologist. I'm a chartered psychologist and also a psychotherapist. So I work with people around shame a lot. And Suicide to Survive is a mental health and suicide prevention charity. So we run a range of different educational programs for communities and organizations around mental health promotion and suicide prevention. And I've been very fortunate to be involved with Sea Change, actually. Suicide to Survive, one of the partners with Sea Change when they were setting up their workplace programs in the very, very beginning. So we have a great affinity for Sea Change, and the stigma reduction work they do is incredible. And also yourselves in HPRA, we've had a lovely and fantastic journey with you. And I've always been blown away by the effort and energy and enthusiasm you put into making your workplace an open workplace culture around mental health and breaking down stigma.
Thank you very much, Paula. And very nice of you to say that about the HPRA. It's a very nice and positive endorsement of what we're trying to do here as well too. So Linda, we'll pass to you to allow you to introduce yourself to everybody and to tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, hi, my name is Linda Garvin and I'm living in Mayo, and I'm a representative of Sea Change. I'm one of their ambassadors. So the idea of the ambassadors is that we can talk about our own personal lived experience in relation to mental health difficulties, and that just helps to open the conversation with people around the country about how it feels to live with a mental health difficulty and the different difficulties that we encounter. So it's basically about just, I suppose, bringing a face and a story to a number and making it more real for people. So it's just something I feel really passionately about, and that's why I wanted to volunteer with Sea Change and try and make a difference and start breaking down the stigma and shame barriers.
Thanks very much, Linda. And Donal, we'll pass to you to speak a little bit about yourself and your background.
Thank you, Lorraine. Good morning and welcome to my fellow panelists and the audience as well listening in. Yeah, my name is Donal O'Connor. I've been with the HPRA for a little over 4 years. I'm currently a clinical manager in our medical device department. And prior to joining the HPRA, I trained as a general surgeon and worked in both clinical practice in many of our hospitals in Ireland for over 10 years, and also in medical students and undergraduate and postgraduate education. So I'm deliberately not an expert in mental health. I want to make that clear. I'm not a psychiatrist or a GP with a special interest. If you think of maybe the people who among the medical profession predominantly who may be the experts or targeted in this, but this is an area that I suppose long been interested and involved in, predominantly from the point of view of the aspects that affect medical education, student welfare, and junior trainee welfare. I've been involved in programs like that. But when I joined the HPRA, might sound like a strange statement coming from the direct sort of patient engagement hospital sector, but I was pleasantly surprised at the initiatives and the genuine prioritization and awareness being made around these very important issues. And I was fortunate that I took part as a participant in some of the Sea Change, and in particular the Suicide or Survive sessions that the HPRA provided for employees. And was particularly taken that they're not really just high-level lip service being paid to the topic of awareness, but they were really genuine deep dive and very concerted efforts to raise awareness around these issues that we'll speak about today. So good morning, everyone. Looking forward to participating.
Thanks very much, Donal. So I think with that, we'll probably move on to the discussion itself. And I think we are exploring today what shame feels like in the context of mental health. So perhaps a very good place to start is describing what shame is in relation to mental health and how that might actually feel for someone who has never experienced it. So Paula, maybe if we could start with you to tell us what you think about those things that I've put to you there in that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we may not have all experienced shame around our mental health, but I think we probably all experienced shame to some level or to some degree. For me, Shame is that kind of feeling almost where you want to hide your head. You kind of feel you're not really fit to be in public or with other people, where you want the ground to open up and swallow you. You know, we've all had those experiences at some stage in our lives. If you think about it, you know, your most the secret that you hold most, that you would least want other people to know about you, and imagine that that's been exposed. You know, that's the feeling that we get, the feeling of shame. And the feeling of shame is all about not being good enough, being inferior, being worthless, being not strong enough, not smart enough, not whatever it is, enough. And that's really that feeling of shame, and that feeling of inferiority, and being less than, because of either something that you've done, an experience that you've had, or a mental health difficulty that you're struggling with. And that's the real danger of shame around mental health, is because it adds to the already difficult time that somebody who's struggling has.
Okay. So Linda, is there anything maybe that you would like to add to what Paula has outlined there, just from your own perspective?
She's described it so perfectly. You know, that's how I would say it's that, you know, stomach churn and embarrassment at just the highest level that you can imagine. And I think for somebody who has experienced or who's currently living with mental ill health, it's that sense of, it's actually because that shame is because of who you are. And it's just cuts so deep, and I think that's where it's really, it becomes a difficulty, because you're shaming yourself, and you also feel kind of shamed by culture and the judgments that you are receiving. So that's a big one.
Yeah, I think that fear of judgment is huge, isn't it, Linda? That fear of judgment by other people, and then we layer on our own judgments of ourselves on top of that. So it really does weigh us down.
Yeah.
Sure. And Linda, maybe if I can come back to you on this, and following kind of from what you've both said here, and to explore it a little bit further, where a person actually has a mental health difficulty or a mental illness, can you describe the emotions, the actual emotions of shame?
Yeah,
that kind of goes with that experience.
Like exactly what Paula said as well, just that sense of you just want to hide away. And you know, when you're struggling with your mental health, you already feel isolated, and you're probably to a certain extent already isolating yourself. So then with the shame on top of that, you know, you're investing, you're either hiding away from people, or you're hiding your illness, and you're investing an awful lot of energy into that. You know, that takes so much energy to sustain that, you know, mask that people wear. So, you know, that's kind of the secrecy side of it. And then in addition to that, because of the stigma and the shame, you tend not to ask for help. You tend not to seek medical intervention. You tend not to share your feelings and your fears with your friends and your family, the people who should support you the most or could support you the most. You know, and to me, again, that's silence. And Brené Brown, you know, Paul is probably very familiar with, who has studied shame, you know, across her lifetime. She says if you were to put shame into a petri dish, see the science reference there, Lorraine. If you were to put shame into a petri dish, it needs 3 things to exponentially grow, and that's secrecy, silence, and judgment. And that's exactly the 3 things that the person with shame feels, is that the silence, nobody is talking about it, the secrecy that you feel that you have to hide away, and then that huge fear of judgment, that what are people going to think when they find out the truth about me, when they find out who I really am. You know, that's where it, you know, it comes into play. And you know, between all of that, then your world starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller, until you know, the light at the end of the tunnel really does just disappear. So it's not to be minimized. Like it really is huge, and it has huge impact on people.
I have to say, Linda, I'm really struck by what you say there, because it really describes what I put myself through after I had my 3rd child. I definitely had postnatal depression. I had it for months, and I could not go to the doctor. I could not admit this was happening to me. I hid it and hid it and hid it. And the judgment came from me more than anybody else. And I just made
Absolutely.
my own life, my husband's life, and my other kids' lives so hard because I was so withdrawn and isolated. And I could have taken a step that could have made that differently. So
Yeah.
Donal, I just give you an opportunity maybe to come in there as well to respond to what Linda has said.
Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, no, I think Linda and Paul have spoken really well on this. It might be worth maybe reiterating or continuing to reiterate throughout this session the differences maybe between things like guilt and embarrassment and shame, because and there's commonality here with many aspects of mental illness or maybe more severe mental difficulties people may have, because a lot of the words we'll use and a lot of the symptoms and the feelings are normal, relatable feelings that everybody has, but obviously when shame and getting into more serious mental health difficulties or illness, they're far more pervasive and they're long running, and there's underlying issues associated with them and consequences. But some of that speaks to the difficulty people might have in sharing issues they may have, because they're going to refer to symptoms that, well, everybody feels like this in the morning, or when their kids are getting ready to do their leaving cert, or they've got a big job interview, or there's problems at work or problems in the home. But I suppose it's separating almost the actions from the person's own self-worth. So the example and an area I would have looked into and worked a bit around in previously, but it's very relatable in our current working environment. When absenteeism, be that with people on training courses or people working in very high pressure clinical environments, so say surgical and operating theatres where I would have worked, if there's an absence from work, that's very acutely felt by the work colleagues. And if someone might miss work because of, let's say, a very easily explainable illness, they've had COVID-19, for example, or they've broken their leg, or they've been in a car accident, or they have a serious but sort of reasonably well understood condition that a lot of people would be aware of. Maybe they have a neurological condition, maybe they have something like Crohn's disease, so a chronic illness. They may miss a period of work. They might feel guilty because their colleagues have had to pitch in, or guilty because they've missed something important. If it's an illness that some of the symptoms mightn't be so pleasant, you have to run to the bathroom, etc., etc. Yeah, there might be some embarrassment there, but that's very different than shame, where the person might feel, let's say, for example, they've missed work because of anxiety or depression, or an eating disorder, for example, something that very much is in the sphere of mental illness that can be formally diagnosed if they sought attention. If they're missing work for that reason, what they may be experiencing, if we're going to talk about shame, is that they're not just guilty because they've missed work. They feel shame. They feel that they are not worthy to be working with their colleagues. They're not worthy to be on the same team. They're not worthy to socialize with their family, or whatever the family occasion might be that they've missed. So it's very different. If we're unwell for an issue that can be very clearly separated out from mental health issues, yeah, we might be guilty because we missed a certain cousin's wedding because we were in hospital, or we were under the weather for some reason, and again, why we've had to miss work or not been able to help out in a certain project. But if it's underlying shame, where it's that lack of self-worth, and you really feel you are the problem, I'm sick because it's my problem, I'm the reason that all this is happening, that's far more difficult to deal with. And Linda gave a good example there about isolationism. People may change their behavior, and they really try and work in isolation, socialize in isolation, and for a while that can, again, they'll suffer on silence. People may not notice it, because again, there's a spectrum of all these things, and people who might be having mental health issues and serious mental health issues otherwise in both their social lives and their working life, they may be very highly functional people, and adapting into isolationism, if they're otherwise very productive in other ways, they may be able to sort of, again, suffer on in silence for a long time. And if the underlying issue is that deep-seated shame, that lack of self-worth, well, naturally they may be less likely to not only even talk about it with their family and colleagues, but seek particular attention. So I think then to run into two sort of consequences, I mean, other contributors may speak more of this. You could separate it into the consequences of shame and stopping people, I suppose, fulfill social relationships and fulfill various development and working relationships. And then maybe the slightly more refined scope, but obviously ultimately more serious, it may just stop them seeking appropriate health-seeking behaviour, so appropriate help for possibly an undiagnosed and more serious mental health condition. Because I suppose shame is one of those chicken and egg. Shame that's really unchecked is inevitably going to lead to issues with depression and anxiety, and unfortunately more serious and more ultimate consequences of those if they go on and are untreated. And also it can really be a symptom. So someone can have obviously anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and again, because of a deep-seated shame around this, they're just not going to bring it out into the open or seek the appropriate help, which is obviously very important. And that's why at the non-medical professional level, it is worth having these conversations, because it's more about opening up people, opening up their eyes and signposting them. It's not that we're going to step in as people managers or HR departments or organizations and be surrogate for healthcare professionals. It's more by trying to create the awareness so people can seek the appropriate help. Because, and this wasn't maybe the case in the 40s and 50s and 60s, there are very effective treatments. There is a far better understanding and professional approach to this among the medical professional, but there's still a gap there where the silent sufferers, for want of a better term, can continue to go on. So I'll stop there, because I know Linda and Paula may be able to elaborate on that a little.
Yeah, can I just say that the shame can cause us, we're talking a bit about isolation, but also some people, because of shame, will actually overcompensate and will burn themselves out, will work extra hard to overcompensate for it so that nobody knows about their mental health difficulties, and very often can, as I said, burn themselves out and end up pushing themselves even beyond the existing limits. And I did a lot of work at one stage. I was partner in an organisation that specialised in helping people back into the workplace when they were out of work due to illness or injury, and majority of people who had mental health difficulties that we were working with. And for a lot of people, there was that question of, what am I going to say when I go back to work? What am I going to say? Or if I need to step out, what are people going to think? What am I going to say? And many people who really push themselves to their limits to hide their difficulty, overworking, working extra hours, really, really, really pushing themselves. So there's kind of two sides to that coin. There's the bit that maybe where you might isolate and pull back, but there's also the part where maybe you'll overcompensate and push yourself to the limit. So I think we need to be alert to both. And just keeping an eye out for both. That stigma can result in either of those.
And Paula, can I ask you there, because you've really kind of picked up on what was my next question, is kind of going a little bit deeper into the wider impacts. I'm just very conscious of what Donal has said there around creating and having those conversations sort of creates that safe space that maybe helps stopping that spiral of, that downward spiral that we're really talking about, where the emotions actually exacerbate even further, and that's all driven through shame. How important do you think those conversations are in relation to trying to bring a bit of control to this for the person?
Yeah, I think you cannot underestimate. That's why it's so great to be here having a conversation about that. Conversation is just so important. We all want three things in life. We want safety, significance, and acceptance. Yeah. And if you think about stigma, I think Lorraine was referring there to Brené Brown. Those are the things that are taken away. We want to feel safe. If you are in a workplace or in a home environment or any kind of environment where you feel safe to have a conversation, where you can actually, this is something that's talked about, so it's okay. It's not, I remember when I was growing up, we didn't talk about mental health. It was that person over there, or the one who, we didn't even say it out loud. It was kind of bad with their nerves, or gone to the house on the hill, or all our psychiatric hospitals are tucked away in places where they're kind of separated. So we couldn't have a conversation. We couldn't even speak the words out loud. And now, thankfully, we're in a little bit of a better position to have a conversation. But we've got to create a space of safety. So having open conversations in any workplace around mental health, having training sessions, having policies and procedures there creates a safety where a person can speak. And if you think about shame and that issue of significance and acceptance, I know certainly when I've struggled with my mental health, you know, there have been times when I felt really insignificant, like I didn't matter, like I was nobody. And then the shame on top of that kind of adds to that. And that piece of acceptance, you know, accepting yourself, because stigma doesn't only come from outside, stigma comes from inside, you know. So not only are we struggling with our mental health, then we add the shame and the stigma on top of that, and we maybe isolate, which removes us from having those conversations, removes us from the connections that as human beings we all want, or we overcompensate and drive ourselves to our limits, you know. And that the stigma it's layer on layer on layer. So we're just adding and adding and adding layers and layers. So if we can have those conversations, you're taking away that layer. You're taking away that extra layer. So the person can actually get on with recovering and restoring their mental health. And have the space to do that, where that's okay, where it's okay to actually not always be 100%, where it's okay not to always be able to maybe pull the same weight as you've always pulled in your workplace, and that's understood and accepted, and you're not seen as any less. That we all have dips, and you know, it can be any of us can struggle. None of us knows. So I always think, you know, if you treat other people the way you'd like to be treated if it was you, then we're going in the right direction.
Absolutely. And Linda, can I ask you, just in relation to what Paula has outlined there in relation to our history, maybe as a country, in terms of the stigma that we would have associated with mental health? Is there anything there that maybe Paula hasn't covered that you feel we would you'd like to pick up on? Do you feel in overall terms, for example, that we are getting better at this, that we are shifting the dial in the right direction?
I think from a lot of the discussions that I've had with people is that people, they want to be supportive, but they're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. And what we always say to people is that the silence sometimes hurts more than anything. So like what Donal said, I go off work sick and I have a broken leg, I'm going to get the text messages, the phone calls, whatever. If I go off work, and even if people know that I'm off work because I have depression, it's silence. There's no messages, there's no phone calls. And that's not because people don't care, it's because they just don't know what to say. So it's about getting comfortable with having those uncomfortable conversations. And what I try to equate it to is, so if somebody that you work with has been diagnosed with a serious illness, you know, like cancer, for example, and they're coming back into the workplace, you don't necessarily want to have that conversation with them. It is uncomfortable, but we're more at ease with acknowledging that that person is struggling and asking what they need. The same thing with grief. We're not very comfortable with, you know, expressing our condolences to somebody who's been through a significant loss in their family, but culturally, it's acceptable and it's almost expected to have that uncomfortable conversation and to pay your respects. And it's the same thing with somebody with a mental health illness. Somebody said, you know, what should I say? Just, I know, you know, how are you? Would you like to go for a coffee sometime? And just want to see if everything's okay, just checking in. And that person may not be ready to have that conversation with you right there and then, but they will remember. And when they are in need of support, they will know that you're able to have that conversation with them. So it's just, like Paula said, it's sitting around the dinner table and talking about what emotions feel like. You know, I think there are a lot of people out there struggling with their mental health and they don't even know that they are. They just think that this is how life is. It's always going to be this hard, and it doesn't have to be.
I think our emotional literacy can be very, very poor, you know, and there's always that awkwardness around what do I say? And actually, sometimes the thing to say is I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Actually. Yeah. Or, you know, is there anything that you need? Or how can I help? Or any of those kind of things. But it is that piece around just being open enough. And you know what? People worry about saying the wrong thing. It's very hard to say the wrong thing if you're coming from a good place. Yeah. If you're coming from a place of genuine caring and kindness, it's very hard to say the wrong thing. And, you know, sometimes I put my foot in it, you know, and it's okay to say, I'm really sorry, that came out in a way that I didn't intend it, or that's not what I meant, or I hope that didn't hurt or harm. It's okay to say that because we're human and we won't always get it right. But it's very, you know, there's kindness costs you nothing.
Exactly. I'm so struck by what Linda has sort of said. The silence hurts more. And if we can all keep that in mind, no matter how awkward or difficult it may feel, it is far better to maybe put your foot in it rather than not try. And I think, I think everybody, as you say, Linda, people do remember it afterwards when they are ready, maybe to open up. Donal, is there anything that maybe you would like to bring out on that point? Because I know you spoke very much so at the context of the workplace and the impact.
Follow a little bit what Linda and Paul have touched on there, and maybe particularly in the sphere of someone who maybe has a diagnosis with a more serious mental health difficulty or illness, be it again anxiety or depression or something like this, and maybe has been diagnosed and been on some formal or formalized treatment, be that counselling or medication, etc. I suppose it's just an aspect of, in your interactions with them, normalizing it a little bit. It's not obsessing over it and making it front and center, because that's another issue. You don't want anyone to be defined by their illness or referred to by their illness. But there was stigma around lots of illness and lots of diseases, be it cancer, be it certain neurological things. 20, 30 years ago that we've moved on from. I think of an example from when I was maybe a medical student, right, 20 years ago to maybe more recently. Two different sort of family friends, one diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 20 years ago, and that was like the reaction, the tiptoeing around it, because it was, people associated that, and the treatments are different, as a very poor prognosis, and it obviously can be, but for many patients with it, it's a very good prognosis. Someone could be working beside you at work, and you'd never know really, that's sort of improvement, and just the difference in the space of probably 20 years or so. In maybe 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been, no one would have liked to speak about it at the wedding, the various family members, and now it was actually at a wedding then more recently. Someone was explaining to me that their brother was recently, that I was friends with the brother was diagnosed with MS, and they were on certain treatment. And did I know the doctor? Of course, because it's Ireland and everybody. And just speaking very freely about that. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily going to be appropriate for all examples of mental illness, but it's, there's no reason we can't bring a little bit of that in. And it even could be said, don't be worried about putting your foot in it. If they are back at work, and you might say, was your treatment change? Things that we get used to. You don't need to be an expert. We often ask people what might actually be quite inane questions about chemotherapy when you think about how serious and how personal and emotional that can be, and we end up asking them, what was that like, and what hospital are you in, or et cetera, et cetera. You can introduce a little bit of that, almost, or did you have such and such treatment? Was that any good? I've never heard about that. It's almost normalizing that. It's just part of a particular type of treatment that someone would have. Again, that's the other thing to be conscious of, I suppose, is that you don't trivialize some of the symptoms as such, because I say, unlike cancer or inflammatory bowel disease or multiple sclerosis, a lot of the terminology and a lot of the symptoms that someone will use at various times, everyone will feel them, but it's, I suppose, recognized there's a difference there. Not like, you're back to, are you back to your normal self? I suppose just be careful. Maybe there are certain things that we take for granted. I'm talking about normalizing it, but then you don't want to, I suppose, be making the distinction that they're not normal and you are normal, or whatever the case may be. But just very simple questions about, you're back, about their treatment or something, or if there's any particular allowances or accommodations that might need to be made around it. But it's nearly, even if you say the wrong thing, that you're just asking about it, and you're treating it the same as if they were returning from any other illness.
It's really creating the space, isn't it? It's really kind of making it feel safe for people. If I can maybe come back to one of the things that I had sort of said in the introduction, and that is language and the role that language can play in stigmatization. We all use terms like mental and crazy, and we don't often mean them in the way they're intended. But do you think that in a way too has a contribution and plays a role in stigmatization? So maybe Paula, if you might give me your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think nobody means any harm. And these are words that we just use colloquially, but they do it because when you're really struggling, they become about you. They're not about you, and they're not about anything in particular until you're struggling. and then they become, then you because your worth is so low with the stigma and the shame, then those words do become about you and they stick. Do you know, those kind of words stick, and we need to be very careful around that, and this is not about being PC and not being able to open your mouth and not being able to say anything. It's just about thinking before you use those words, because of course they add to stigma, because they're words that are used in a kind of a derogatory way, you know, and stigma. If you think about the meaning of the word stigma, the meaning of the word stigma is a mark of disgrace, you know. So if we're using the words mental, crazy, all of those kind of things attached to that mark of disgrace, then of course they're going to add to stigma, you know. So it's just about minding our language, minding our words, you know, and actually thinking before we speak. And as I said, it's not about censorship and telling people they can't. It's just about being mindful. Being a little bit more mindful, because when it's about you, when you're the one who's struggling and somebody said, oh, the traffic is mental out there, it's like mental means terrible. It means really bad. It means awful. Yeah. And if you're thinking I am mental, which, you know, I've thought about myself, you know, then that kind of adds to that. Yeah. Because we're using the words in a negative sense. Linda, you might have more to say. Yeah.
It's just going to bring Linda in there in terms of her thoughts.
You know, absolutely. It's exactly what Paula has said. You know, we're not trying to be PC, and you know, it's not always black and white. And culturally, there are words that Irish people just use a lot. You know, the weather is crazy, the traffic is crazy. You know, when it's really busy, it's mad. And COVID in particular, probably a lot of people used those words. But it's just to be mindful that whilst, you know, I may not be triggered by the word mad or crazy, those words weren't used as weapons against me in relation to my mental health. And they may have been used, words like that, as weapons, or as labels to other people. So it's just to kind of keep that in mind, that when you are using terminology, that you may be triggering somebody who does have mental health difficulties. You know, we're very quick to say like, oh my God, she's so OCD. Because we think, again, you're almost putting OCD into this bubble of OCD means that somebody has to have everything just clean and all day long and perfectly tidy. And OCD is so much more complicated than that. So in a way, using that terminology sometimes is trivializing the seriousness of the mental health difficulty. So it's just, you know, it's about thinking about what you say. Instead of saying OCD, what other word could you use? Maybe particular, or, you know, if the weather is crazy, maybe it's just the weather is a bit changeable. You know, it's just to pick your words a bit better. And you know, I've had this discussion with a lot of people, and people would say like, well, you know, we're never going to change how we say these words. And I actually think, you know what, we can change. We've become much more aware in relation to LGBTQA terminology, in relation to different cultures and different races, and even, you know, children are much more aware of that because they have wellness being introduced in schools. So I think that if we become more aware of what we're saying, as Paula said, and become more mindful, then that's all we're trying to do. We're just trying to not inflict any more hurt and pain on people. That's basically it.
No, I would agree with you as well. I know as Irish people, we're very conversational. There is a free flow, but I think once you raise this into your consciousness and mark it in your consciousness, it's amazing how that begins to change. And you know, I wouldn't even say this is behavior, because there are many words, there are many descriptions we can use, and it just becomes conscious choice, I would say. So
Yeah.
I think that it's certainly possible to change. And as you say, I think the comparisons with LGBT is really good, I have to say, because that again has become very much so something we are conscious of. And I think
it's just to respect people's choices and, you know, who they are.
Okay, So, Linda, now that I have you here chatting to me as well directly, and I know we had a little bit of a conversation about this before we kind of came on the session today. So, would you allow me, if I can personalize a little bit here, and asking you if you would share maybe some of your own personal experience in describing for us a time where you have experienced shame and really what it was that made you feel this way?
Yeah. I want to pick up on something that you yourself said earlier. So I'm going to give two examples, if that's okay. So the first one is in relation to personal shame, as in that shame that I inflicted upon myself. And I think it's one that brought me the most shame. And that was when I had postnatal depression, and I had it with both of my children, and I was hospitalized after my second child. And I think that if you try to discuss that with people, it really is, it's the one time in your life that everybody is telling you, oh, you're so lucky, you should be so happy, you know, this is the best time of your life, you're being told all these things, you may have wanted this child for as long as you can remember, you know, and suddenly you're just in this pit of darkness and no energy, and you know, thinking, what's wrong with me? You know, I remember thinking, my God, is this how every mother feels? Like, this is not what I signed up for. And immediately you go into, what's wrong with me? I'm not a good mother, which becomes, I'm never going to be a good mother, which becomes, I'm failing at this. I don't want my partner or my husband to see this. I don't want my family to see this. I'm so ashamed. And then when you consider about going for help, of course, you get into all of those discriminatory and judgmental things that you become aware of. Is, if I go for help, you know, are they going to put me away somewhere? Are they going to think my children are at risk? Are they going to take my children off me? And it just escalates into this huge ball of awful negative feelings. And it's so simple to just go to your GP and say, I really feel unwell. And, you know, we talk about, everybody's aware of the hashtag #MeToo, you know, campaign. But when it comes to mental illness, what I find is, once you actually verbalize that experience that you've been through, the amount of people that say, oh, me too, you know, they just need somebody else to open that space and to create that safe environment that's saying, you know what, I understand what it's like. It's okay. You can talk about this with me. I'm not going to judge you. I've been there. So for me, that was probably the most difficult time in my life. And then to bring it to the workplace, which was my other example, is that I was working in a company for over 20 years. So my whole career had been based there. I was very open about my mental health difficulties from the start, but it never impacted my work. The company had a really, really good wellness program on paper. But what I unfortunately discovered was that when I became ill, there were no really procedures or policies in place that supported what I need. I was very, very vocal about what I personally needed. And the reason I'm going into this is because I think in the workplace, this is something that needs to be aired both for employees and employers. So I suppose I was almost put into the situation where I had to prove that I had an illness, and I had to prove that I needed what I said I needed. And that for me is really difficult. I can't go and get an X-ray, I can't get an MRI, I can't get anything that's visibly going to have a piece of paper saying this is the illness that I have, which was anxiety and panic disorder, along with depression. And I didn't have a piece of paper that said, you know, this is what is going to make me better, because I wasn't looking for something to make me better. I was just looking for something to allow me to feel less overwhelmed in the workplace. So I just wanted to be moved to a bigger space. But the point that I'm trying to make is that each employee is going to have a different requirement when it comes to their mental health. So, you know, it's about engaging with that person. It's about, you know, supporting, listening to what they need, not being judgmental, you know, to have a proper illness program, to have a program that actually works when an employee is ill, and to know that that the employee can come to you and talk about what they need without that shame and that stigma. because for me, that was the first time that I felt shamed, which is very different to shame. I really felt that shame was coming from other people, and it was not being hidden in any way. So that was really difficult for me. A huge impact then after that is, you know, if somebody is struggling and they're not getting the right support, but like I ended up losing my job. I ended up having to move away from where I lived because I couldn't afford to stay there anymore. You encounter financial difficulties. Your whole identity is lost. And you're trying to cope with all of that on top of being mentally ill. It's a really, really difficult time, and it's completely avoidable by having real working workplace programs, Lorraine, like you have implemented in the HPRA. It's so important not to underestimate what a difference that can make. Even by having this discussion, the message that you're giving to all your employees is that it's okay to ask for help. Whereas what I learned was that it absolutely is not okay to ask for help. And I suppose I made a vow to myself from that day onwards that I would never work for another employer ever again, because I felt like a gun was being put to my head. And I had to choose between my health or my work, whereas they should go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Paula, is there anything maybe that you would like to expand further on? That
I think
very well.
Yeah, I think I was lucky that I had a different experience to Linda when I spoke to my employer when I was really struggling with my mental health. I was very fortunate. I started to struggle, lots of difficult things going on in my life, and was really struggling. I struggled a lot with anxiety through my life anyway, but my mood took a serious dip, and I was in a position where I was providing mental health supports to other people, and would have considered myself somebody who didn't hold any stigma. I wouldn't judge anybody with a mental health difficulty. I was trying to provide supports, designing initiatives to support people and help people when they were struggling with their mental health. And when it came to me, that's when the stigma really struck, that self-stigma. And I remember the day I thought, okay, I'm going to have to go and tell my boss about this. I'm going to have to tell him that I'm really struggling, on the basis that I'm a bit of an workaholic. Anybody who knows me knows that. And I really felt my work performance was taking a dip. So I needed to let him know. And I was terrified. And he was the most understanding person you could possibly meet. And you wouldn't expect yourself to get any judgment. And it wasn't about his judgment of me, it was about my judgment of me, actually having to go and say the words, which to me meant I'm not strong. I'm not as strong as I thought I was. I'm not as capable. I'm not as competent as I thought I was, which of course was true because I was struggling. And, I wasn't as capable as I would be if I wasn't struggling, because I was preoccupied, I was upset, I was anxious, I was down, all of those things. But admitting it to myself was really hard, and breaking that self-stigma that I had was really difficult. And actually, when I went and eventually, I remember standing outside his office, knees knocking, terrified, hand on the door, take it off, hand on the door, take, I eventually went in, and actually the response I got was, what can I do to help? Is there anything I can do that can help you? I was petrified he was going to send me home because my problems were at home, and work was my salvation. Actually, work was what actually was keeping me going. So my biggest fear was that he was going to tell me what to do. You have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do the other. And I remember thinking, well, if somebody tells me, because other people had said, well, why don't you do this? Well, I did do that, and I've tried that, and or if I could, I would, but I just can't because I haven't got it in. As I said, the most helpful thing was, what can I do to support? What do you need? I might not be able to meet those needs, but let's have a conversation. Tell me about it, and let's have a conversation. Let's see what we can do. And that made all the difference to me, was somebody who didn't judge, who didn't question, who didn't tell me what to do, who didn't take over, who just said, tell me what you need. And that's what accommodation is all about. Reasonable accommodation is all about working with the person as an organization, working with the person to see what do they need, what would be most helpful to them, and how can we work it out between us. And if I can't do it for you, is there something I can do instead? But it's that conversation, that working together. So I was really lucky that I had a very different experience to yours, Linda.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the contrast in the two approaches, isn't it, in the context of the workplace that you're both setting out there. And do you think there are other impacts in the workplace that of this that we haven't maybe considered in terms of shame? Is there anything perhaps, because we've had quite a good discussion on this, but just before maybe we move away a little bit from this area of the conversation, is there anything that you feel maybe we haven't covered or that you would like to say?
Well, there's things sometimes I think like, you know, sometimes we can find ourselves excluded, and by people who are well-meaning, who know we're struggling and maybe saying, oh, well, sure, I won't ask them to do that because that will be extra pressure for them, or I won't involve them in this project because, and it comes from a really good place, a really well-meaning place, or maybe I'll just kind of withdraw some of their duties without them even knowing it. So just, you know, because I know they're struggling and just want them to have an easier time of it. So there's all of those kind of things that people can tippy-toe around, and people can exclude, you know, we won't invite them there because maybe it might be too much, or maybe they wouldn't be able, or maybe it'll make them feel worse if they have to say no, or all of those kind of things. So inadvertently, that adds to the shame. Because the shame is then, well, why am I not being given that project? And I was being considered that for that before, and now I'm not. Or there's a promotion coming up, maybe I can't go for that promotion. All of those kind of bits and pieces that are, as I said, people very well-meaning, not intending to do any harm or any damage. In fact, meaning well, but actually it has an impact to deepening that stigma and that shame.
Yeah, and it's because they're not including the person in that conversation. Like you would, for example, if somebody worked upstairs on a second floor and they broke their leg, you would immediately have that conversation openly with them. What do you need? Where can we locate? How can we help? You know, who's going to carry your tray in the canteen even? You know, everything like that. But those discussions aren't had. Those decisions are made outside of the person. And there's a long history to that as well, even with people, I suppose, being placed into different just psychiatric hospitals, etc. A lot of it would have been done, and even their treatment and everything would have been done without any of their involvement. So just involve the people in the conversation.
I know. And as you say, sometimes that's out of the best of intentions, but
Absolutely.
that even ends up isolating and excluding the individual and the person. I guess it does link a little bit back to what Donal really nicely put as normalize this as well. Donal, is there anything else that maybe you would like to add to this in terms of?
Yeah, I suppose just to come in a little bit what Paula was saying there, and then as well, that's in, I suppose, from the maybe the employee perspective, the employer perspective, the individual, and then their wider societal supports, family supports, peers, etc. I suppose just that awareness there, if someone is having these symptoms or may already have, been diagnosed with a particular condition, I suppose that awareness, that just the numbers game, it's inevitable in your organization or in your family network, other people will have had something similar. And I suppose in the optimistic point of view, they've gone back and contribute fully in their own lives, in their social circles, and contribute fully at work and back to what people might consider fully functional. Because if you were diagnosed if you're in an accident or diagnosed with a certain disease, it's probably not normal that your initial thoughts will be, oh, how will I ever work again? You'll get through what you have to get through. But I suppose with psychiatric illness or mental health difficulties, that all comes down, oh, will I ever be treated normally again? I suppose it's that if there wasn't real examples, you could say I could be disingenuous by saying, oh no, you'll get through this and you'll get back to normal. Caveat in there, I shouldn't be saying getting back to normal, getting back to your normal functional life for you. Because if you think about the sheer numbers of people in highly functional, very busy environments, there are people there who've come through very serious mental health issues and who might still be, on active treatment, and it's just part of their life now, treatment, just like they have diabetes, for example. 30 years ago, it might be more difficult to be saying that because you wouldn't have been sure how well people were integrated back into both their normal social life and into the workplace. But now it's happening all along. And occasionally we get glimpses when the football manager or someone, or occasionally might say, well, no, I don't just have, we're used to maybe the odd time the footballer saying they have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis and I've managed to get to a high level, or Phil Mickelson, the golfer, has famously been on various blockbusting medicines for his rheumatoid arthritis. I suppose it's only more recently where you might get equivalent people who are considered as very high performing, openly admitting that they might take a prescription for depression or anxiety, for example. Mm-hmm. And then just to flip it to the, I suppose, be it the individual people manager or the wider organizational side, I suppose to know that you can integrate people back in, and that's that balance and that transition point. Yes, you initially have to be very understanding, the reasonable accommodations, but there's a limit to those as well, because for many people, they'll want that to sort of stop. They'll just want to be back fully fledged, as if they're the same as the person in the desk or office beside them. And I suppose you just having a bit of awareness and that balance, that you don't want to overly accommodate either. You want to let people fulfill themselves fully, and not to, even though it's with good intentions, not to limit them by a particular diagnosis. Thanks.
Absolutely. And probably because we're coming close to time, I can't finish the questions to the panel with maybe highlighting the whole area of supports or services that you can signpost for people that may be listening to on the call today or on the session today that are currently experiencing shame as a result of having a mental health difficulty. So I'll very quickly maybe pass to Paula and then to Linda and to Donal, maybe to signpost particular supports that may be available to people that they may not be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, we'd always say to people, look, if you're triggered by anything that we've spoken about today, or you're struggling with anything at all, the most important thing is to speak to somebody, whether it's your GP, a family member, a friend, to actually have the conversation. But also people like the Samaritans. The Samaritans number is 116123. I would always say to people, look, people think the Samaritans are really for when you're really, really, really struggling. They're actually not. They'll talk to you if you've had something on your mind that you need to get off, that you need to talk to somebody about, and maybe you don't feel safe to speak to somebody in your immediate circle. So 116123. Pieta have a helpline 24/7, 1-800-247-247. That's available to people. And yourmentalhealth.ie, the HSE's website, is excellent. It gives a load of information around mental health and mental ill health, and also a range of supports by geographical area nationwide. And if you're not really that au fait with the internet and you're not great for looking stuff up online, they actually have a helpline as well that you can call. It's the information line on 1-800-111-888. So that's Your Mental Health information line, and they'll be able to signpost you to supports, or you can text hello to 50808 to speak to a trained volunteer. So there are lots of supports out there. We know there aren't enough, but there are still lots out there, and we would urge people, really do please go and seek support. We have an online wellness workshop on our website that anybody can tap into to look after their own mental health on wellnessworkshop.ie, and a range of programs as well, and suicide survivors that anybody can attend.
Thank you very much, Paula. Linda, we pass to you if there's anything you would like to maybe highlight to people.
Well, just to highlight, I suppose our parent organisation, which is Shine, and they're contactable, www.shine.ie, and they help and support people who are experiencing mental health difficulties, but also their family and friends, because let's not forget as well, it's quite a difficult period for people who are, I suppose, trying to navigate saying the right thing and what they need to do to support people as well who are struggling. And then the other one is that, for younger people, maybe they're, to consider Jigsaw, and I know around Mayo we have Mindspace, which is more kind of peer age related, because a lot of, I suppose, teenagers in adults, they don't really want to, the traditional going in to talk to a counsellor, and as Paula said, the text 50808, because again, some people feel more comfortable with the text. So there's lots of different options there. Yeah.
Thank you, Linda. And Donal.
Yeah, well, I can be brief. The guys have signposted the various relevant facilities there. I mean, depending on the size of your organisation, your HR department may have appropriate signposts into various facilities, or large organisation might be occupational health. But I suppose just to also say, you don't need to commit, maybe if you're having these feelings, to booking an appointment with a psychiatrist. Your family doctor, your general practitioner, outside of psychiatry, people might not be aware that they're an excellent resource for discussing these, and indeed getting on the pathway to treatment if that's what's appropriate for you. So I think they're a very important resource that, even though we're also used to our GPs and our family doctors, we maybe not always realize that they're actually a very important resource for mental health as well. Thanks.
I could just highlight as well, just we have, like, See Change have some great information here. You know, what is stigma, some booklets there, and we also have ones on standing up to stigma and mental health matters. And I suppose it is the month of September, so we just want to highlight, you know, this is the Green Ribbon campaign month, and the idea of wearing the green ribbon is just you're just standing in solidarity with people who are experiencing mental health difficulties, and it's just saying I'm willing and open to having the conversation about mental health and mental illness.
Thank you very much. And finally, I just want to kind of bring the session to a close. So absolutely huge thanks to Paula, Linda and Donal for their discussion today, and for definitely sharing their own stories and their own perspective and insights. I have to say, I commend you all for your honesty and your bravery. And I have to say, it's enlightening and a real enlightenment for others. I certainly learned so much from that conversation myself. And I think in reality, I have to give Linda the prize for the tagline that will stay in my head in relation to stigma. It is that the silence hurts more. And I think if we can all take that home with us today after this discussion and keep that in our minds, I think it is a really good thought to always have in your head in relation to what we can do to reduce stigma. So I also want to say that if other organizations are on this call today and want to hear more about how you can go about implementing the See Change Pledge program and how it can help you create an open and supportive culture regarding mental health, get in touch with See Change directly. And as we've all said here in the concluding question to the panel, they have fantastic resources and supports to help you on your journey. I also do want to bring out the one point I think that came out very well from this session. While all of us are getting better, and particularly in workplaces and organization, in terms of discussion and supporting mental well-being, it is really important to also include that we are focusing on mental illness and support to mental illness. I think, as Linda very well summarized, while we cannot make you better, we can definitely make it better while you are going through an experience like this as well. And finally, the green ribbon is an international symbol for mental health awareness and signifies hope to so many people about starting positive conversations about all areas of mental health. By wearing one, you're showing your support in this campaign and doing your bit to end mental health stigma and discrimination. So wear your green ribbon for the week as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude the session and thank you all. Good morning.
Thank you so much.